Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them is fielding candidates in Ashfield, Sherwood and Broxtowe. Its policies include mandatory paternity tests, a 13-week limit on abortion and a banning of circumcision in children, which it calls male genital mutilation. Party leader Mike Buchanan says it's fighting against an all-pervading anti-male ideology.
Although the majority of, let's say, politicians are men, they always pass legislation and the state always operates so as to advantage women and girls over men and boys. There is no politician that would dare speak up for men's human rights, so they're all, to varying degrees, anti-male.
The new anti-feminist party is fielding 3 candidates for the general election, all in Nottinghamshire. Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them is fielding candidates in Ashfield, Sherwood and Broxtowe. Its policies include mandatory paternity tests and a 13-week limit on abortion.
Sport, travel and weather in a moment on BBC Radio Nottingham, but the headlines are first from Clara Lethbridge.
An anti-feminist party has revealed that it's fielding 3 candidates for the general election, all in Nottinghamshire. One candidate will attempt to unseat Gloria Di Piero, Shadow Women and Equalities Minister. Another will challenge the Conservative Minister Anna Soubry, and a third will stand for Sherwood.
16 minutes to 8 o'clock, and don't forget, after the news at 8, you are going to be hearing more from this fairly new political party, which seems to have its home in Nottinghamshire. It's called Justice for Men and Boys, and then in brackets, and the Women Who Love Them. So it's a bit of a mouthful in terms of the party name, especially when you compare it to the Conservatives or Labour. You've got quite a long-winded approach here. But the reason for that is to explain what this party is about. And I suppose looking at the policies, looking at the kind of things that the party stands for, it stands on an anti-feminism stance. It believes feminism has gone too far. So far, in fact, that they accuse some feminists of lying. They have a Feminist Liar of the Month award, for instance. They want to see changes to the way that rape is prosecuted in this country, changes to the abortion laws. They want to have compulsory paternity tests for all children born in this country, so you know exactly who the father is. Mother's obvious, isn't it? But you know exactly who the father is. And you'll hear a little bit more about this party and its policies. It's got 3 candidates who'll be standing in Nottinghamshire after the news at 8. More on that on BBC Radio Nottingham. Do you think, though, that men need a political party in order to stand for them alone? I suppose it's the opposite of feminism. It's maleism, isn't it? Do men need a political party to defend their rights in 2015, do you think? 015 934 3434 when you text NOT plus your message to 81333. It's 7:45. Your latest news headlines. This new anti-feminist party is in the news today, fielding 3 candidates for the general election, and all of them in Nottinghamshire. After the news, you're going to meet this party leader who's causing a bit of a stir with his views on rape and genital mutilation, divorce and feminism. He's standing for election in Nottinghamshire. You're going to hear from him and find out what a feminist thinks of his policies as well.
A passion for Nottinghamshire life. Nottinghamshire life.
BBC Radio Nottingham.
It's 8 o'clock. I'm Clara Lethbridge. An anti-feminist party has revealed that it's fielding 3 candidates for the general election, all in Nottinghamshire. Its controversial policies include rewriting rape laws, reducing the abortion limit to 13 weeks and introducing mandatory paternity tests for every newborn. David Sykes reports.
Mike Buchanan certainly is not your average politician. His party, Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them, is to stand for election in Ashfield, Sherwood and Broxtowe. The party's main thrust is undoing what its leader says is an all-pervading anti-male ideology.
The feminists that we have an objection to are those who manipulate public bodies to forever advantage women and girls at the expense of men and boys. If we make them angry, good. Any day that I don't upset the radical feminist is a wasted day for me.
While the gender pay gap is at its lowest since records began, women earning 9% less on average, the party has come under fire from feminists who've called Mr Buchanan a suffragette in reverse, a title unlikely to upset the party leader.
First, do you think politicians are all the same? Well, meet the party called Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them. Come the general election, it's going to be fielding 3 candidates in Nottinghamshire, in Broxtowe, Sherwood, and its leader, Mike Buchanan, is taking on the Ashfield constituency. The party's manifesto is proudly anti-feminist, an ideology that it says has systematically and ruthlessly exploited the gynocentric culture of the UK, making women excessively fearful of men and, in consequence, hateful towards men as a class. He wants to limit abortion to 13 weeks before a fetus's gender can be identified. He says circumcision is male genital mutilation and that should be outlawed. And he wants every newborn to be subject to a paternity test to prevent what he calls paternity fraud, where a woman tricks a man into thinking that he's the father or deliberately causes her contraception to fail. Well, Mike Buchanan is here at BBC Radio Nottingham, as is Ruth Greenberg from the Nottingham Feminist Action Network. Hello, morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Why do you hate feminists so
Why
much,
do I hate
Mike?
feminists? I hate radical feminists specifically, because radical feminism is a female supremacy movement driven by misandry. And now,
Isn't it an equality movement?
No, it's not. No, radical feminism, which has been the only form of feminism of the slightest consequence in the UK for the last 30 or 40 years. It's all about relentless advantaging of women. So we have in our manifesto 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the state. There is not one area where the human rights of women and girls are assaulted by the state.
OK, so give me some examples. What kind of thing?
Well, probably the number one thing that we campaign about is fathers' rights. So the family law courts routinely fail to ensure that fathers get access to their children. We have supporters who spent over £100,000 in legal fees trying to ensure that they have access to their children, and denial of access between children and fathers. To our mind, it's emotional abuse of children, emotional abuse of fathers, and emotional abuse of grandparents.
That's probably not the most controversial aspect of the kind of things that you stand for, though, is it? Tell me about your changes to rape and the way that rape is prosecuted.
The coalition agreement, some almost 5 years ago now, committed to reintroducing anonymity for suspected sex offenders. And it reneged on that, as it reneged on other areas, including fathers' rights. So we've seen a whole series of show trials of elderly men, and the justice system takes no interest whatsoever in female sex offenders, and it's known that a substantial proportion of sex offenders are women, and they abuse both men.
Well, it's known because quite a number of them have ended up being prosecuted. So surely it does take.
No. I'm talking about women here.
Yeah.
The very few women are targeted by the criminal justice system. And but it is, female sex offending is very common, but the justice system just takes no interest in their offending, both against men, women, and children.
And this paternity test
Yes.
thing. So do you believe that women are deliberately misleading their partners? Do you?
Well, there's no question about
widespread
it.
thing?
Well, there's no question. It's very common. I mean, there's two forms of paternity fraud that we talk about. One is where women. Lead a man to believe they're the biological father of a child when they're not, and the other is where women frustrate contraceptive methods. And I guess probably the most common example of that is where they say they're taking the pill but don't. So basically, men are tricked into fatherhood. I mean, women cannot.
And men should surely have some responsibility themselves, though. For contraception,
so you're saying if a woman tricks a man into making her pregnant, that he should be liable financially for 20 years?
I'm saying that any man who agrees to tango knows what the consequences could be.
Well, no, I'm sorry, but consent to sex is not consent to fatherhood. There is no.
Well, it's not if you're sure about it, isn't it? That's why, as a man, you take responsibility for that kind of thing.
Well, why should you take responsibility for another man's child?
No. Take responsibility for making sure, if you don't want a child, that you use a condom. What's wrong with that?
So if a woman tells you that she's taking a contraceptive pill and isn't, that should be a man's problem.
Well, in some ways, you could say it is, yes.
Well, no, it
Why not?
certainly is, but it shouldn't be, because at the end of the day, men should have rights. And I go back to the point that consent to sex isn't consent to fatherhood. Whereas for women, women can have an abortion, they can put a child up for adoption. Basically, in the area of reproduction, women have rights and men have responsibilities.
Ruth, what do you make of all of this?
Mike is on here trying to sound reasonable, but if you actually read the manifesto, as I did last night, it's quite clear that, as well as the things he's talking about, that the party really is trying to kind of return society to a kind of idealised vision of the 1950s. So they talk about, for example, that parents should marry and never divorce, that women should stay at home and not work.
Rubbish. That's absolute rubbish, Ruth.
I didn't interrupt you, Mike. That is the model that they're going for, in spite, of course, that Mike is twice divorced with children of his own. They want a very traditional kind of family arrangement. They criticise blended families.
But aren't they just saying that in an ideal world, that kind of family offers stability for a child? It's the best way to bring up a child.
If two people, if a man and woman have a child and can stay together and have a happy relationship, of course that benefits everybody. But we all know that life doesn't always work out like that. You know, people don't tend to divorce, particularly when they have children, as a kind of willy-nilly idea. It's often because relationships have really broken down. There's been affairs, there's been violence, or there's been, they don't talk to each other, they argue constantly. It's not something that people do lightly.
What about feminism he doesn't seem to like is, and it says here on the website here, it describes it as an ideology which teaches women to hate men and boys. Is that how you see feminism?
No, it's not how I see feminism. Of course, feminists will hate actions that men and boys do men do that are violent. So, if you have a man who rapes children, don't expect me to love him and value him.
It's a bit of an extreme example, though, isn't it?
Well, that is the kind of thing that, Mike's kind of thinks that us criticising men raping children, men raping women, is somehow hating all men.
OK, well, let him speak for himself. Is that what you think?
No, of course not. I mean, everything that Ruth has said is just complete nonsense. I think you said, Ruth, that we think people shouldn't divorce. Was that it? Something bizarre like that?
That's what you say in your manifesto.
No, it's not what we say in our manifesto, and people can look at our manifesto online.
What do you say?
Well, in terms of divorce?
In terms of divorce, yeah.
In terms of divorce, we say that it shouldn't be a route for women to personally enrich themselves. So three quarters of divorces are filed by women, because the state basically, the divorce courts basically put married men, as they go through the courts, through the mangle. So even if a woman has earned absolutely nothing, has contributed not one penny to the marital...
It's not about what you earn, though, is it?
Well,
in a marriage, it's about what you bring to that marriage. It's not about the financial input that you have.
Well, why then should a woman who's contributed not one penny to a couple's wealth get half the wealth? I mean, that's just obscene.
Because she brought half of the partnership of that marriage.
So what has that to do with money?
Because a marriage is more than money, isn't it? So at the end of the day, the marriage is a collection of two people, of which they both may earn different amounts of money.
No, but I go back to the point that three quarters of divorces are filed for by women, because it's a way. But basically, the state enables women to mug wives to mug their husbands and take their assets.
Okay, just in 30 seconds, Ruth, anyone who's thinking about voting for Mike at the general election or for any of his other candidates, what would you say to them?
I would say don't, quite clearly. Read the manifesto. There's lots of crazy things in there. So, for example, the stuff about custody, about fathers. They argue about fathers' rights and not the rights of children and the needs of children. Courts should always put the needs of children first. It's not about fathers, it's not about mothers, it's about children.
And your 30 seconds, Mike, why should somebody vote for you?
Well, just to pick on that very, very quickly, we very much do talk about children. And
no, you don't.
Yes, we do. We have a section on fatherlessness, Ruth, a whole section, and which is emotional abuse of children. The denial of children to have access to their fathers and grandparents is obscene.
OK, thank you both for joining us this morning, and you can make your mind up in May, can't you?
And already this morning, you've heard from the anti-feminist party, the guy who's leading that party, and they're putting up 3 candidates in Nottinghamshire at the general election. Amongst other things, the Justice for Men and Boys party want to change rape laws, and also there's the proposal to introduce mandatory paternity tests for every single newborn baby. So how much of what you heard earlier actually rings true? What do you make of what you heard earlier from the Justice for Men and Boys party? Your reaction, 9343434.
27 minutes past 8 o'clock. On the party that were here after the news at 8 today, putting up 3 candidates in the general election in Nottinghamshire, and you heard a bit about their views there. They stand on a sort of anti-feminist platform. Harriet in Farndon says, re the political party, is it a splinter faction of the monster raving loonies? Carolyn Mansfield says, I worked my husband didn't. He had half out of our marriage when we divorced. Thank you, Mark. And still more reaction coming in the wake of that interview as well. And not all from women, just in case you were wondering that. For instance, Mike says on Twitter, this man is a clown. I think we can tell he's what he is by looking at his divorces, plural. He is an absolute moron. Anthony says, I couldn't bear the sheer stupidity of the anti-feminist guy. And also Francis says, please stop the anti-female interview and move on to real news. But Alan has been in touch on the A52, and he says, why is there a minister for women but not for men? Of course, I suspect the answer to that one is that generally people don't believe that women have equality yet, especially when you look at things like wages, for instance. Women doing the same job as men earn less. So that might be why there's a minister for women and women's issues and not for men.